All right, welcome back to another episode of the Always Adaptive podcast. This time I have a dear friend with me. His name is Dr. Alex Ruth. Him and I linked up in Raleigh. We were networking together down here, and initially we had met each other in Maryland. He was at the gym that I was working at, CoreWorks. He moved down to North Carolina. We linked up, and actually he helped me out in a bind. I had a really bad lower back episode where I was debilitated, and out of the kindness of his heart, he came to my house free of charge, helped me out a couple of times. And so I always enjoyed the way that Alex thinks about chiropractic and the way that he discusses it. And I think him and I have very similar philosophies. But Alex, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Randall, it's a pleasure to be here. Very honored to be a guest on Always Adaptive podcast. Can't wait to get going and talk about chiropractic with you, man.
Yeah, me as well, dude. Thank you for being on. So before we start, Alex and I thought it would be a good idea to discuss a few words that you're probably going to hear over and over again. So just kind of lay the framework to what we're going to be talking about. But the main core of the podcast is going to be going through sort of myths about chiropractic adjustments, and you'll get to hear Alex's take on those things, sort of like evidence-based stuff. And yeah, so before we start, one word you're going to hear a lot is proprioception. And essentially what that is like your awareness of your body and the space around you. So, you know, your sense of touch or stretch on a muscle. Let's say you're lifting weights and let's say you're lowering the weight on a bicep curl. Your biceps have what are called muscle spindles, and they literally look like a spiral, and they sense stretch. So if they stretch out, it sends a reflexive signal back to your nervous system to contract that muscle. And those are very important because without those, your arm would just break. There would be no reflexive signal to control that contraction. So when you hear us talk about proprioception, we're basically talking about that connection between your peripheral and then back to your central nervous system, just the communication signals that are going back between the two. And then another big word you'll hear is subluxation. Alex, you want to explain subluxation?
Yeah, so subluxation is a tricky one because it has both a medical and orthopedic definition as well as a chiropractic definition. So in the realm of orthopedics and the way that medical doctors would use the word subluxation, it means less than a dislocation. So not a full dislocation, like if somebody's shoulder, the ball and socket, this ball comes out of the socket, that's a full dislocation. A partial dislocation is something they might call a subluxation. In chiropractic, subluxation is a conceptual term that refers to basically any dysfunction in that, like Randall was just talking about with proprioception, that feedback loop between the brain and the body. So we have afferent, which is sensory information coming from the body to the brain, and efferent neural pathways. So efferent from the brain to the body. So if I tell my bicep to contract, that's an efferent signal from brain to body. Afferent, if I can feel my bicep is tight, that's body to brain. So subluxation in chiropractic refers to any kind of disconnection between those two systems. So if you're not accurately perceiving your body, the amount of stretch, tension, compression, torsion, what the reality is in your body compared to the perception that your brain's receiving about that reality. So any kind of disconnect between what's going on in the body and how the brain's making sense of it, that can be described as a subluxation. I know it's kind of heady and a lot of words right off the gate, but as we talk about it, it'll get clearer.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then I guess, well, you could put it all together. How would you describe a chiropractic adjustment? Like what's going on there when a chiropractor is doing his thing?
Yeah, so chiropractic adjustment is basically identifying, first there's the analysis where we identify where these disconnection points are. Where is the body, or rather, where's the brain not accurately perceiving the body and not getting a complete and honest picture of how the body is relating to space and relating to gravity. So first, the analysis helps us identify that through various indicators, and different techniques have, myriad of different ways to identify those. And then the adjustment is basically putting sensory input through those joints, through those neural pathways, so that the brain has a better, more accurate, more complete conceptualization, perception, and understanding of what the body is doing in space, how it's related to gravity. And with that, you're better able to adapt to your internal and external environment. So there are a lot of different ideas about what chiropractors do and how we do it. But I think just about across the board, almost every chiropractor in the world would say what we do is help the system better adapt from the inside out to stresses both internally and externally.
Yeah, that's great. I really liked last time we spoke what you were talking about with your dad, how when you're adjusting, you're not actually stretching his spine out. Do you want to tell that story? I think that's a good picture
Yeah.
for people to imagine.
So it's really common when I, give somebody an adjustment afterwards, they stand up and they're like, wow, I feel taller. And sometimes people actually do, noticeably have like an inch or an inch and a half of their height back after getting adjusted. So with my dad, for example, he has a glioblastoma, which is a very serious kind of brain cancer. 5-year survival rate is less than 5%. And part of the reason that I moved back home to Maryland and started practicing here is so I could be close to my family, help support them through this time, and also give my dad regular high-quality chiropractic care. And one of the things that happens, especially when he's, fatigued or when he was going through treatment, he would get kind of hunched over, his feet would start dragging when he walked, things like that, it's not an issue with his foot and ankle, it's an issue with his central nerve system. And after the adjustment, he'd stand up, he'd get off the table, and he's suddenly taller than me again. It's not because, I pulled his legs and stretched him out and opened up his joints and created more physical length there. It's because when his body has more complete and accurate information, his brain has more complete and accurate information about his body, he aligns himself more optimally with gravity. So somebody who's stuck in flexion in that forward posture, when they can start getting more information from the joints in their spine and their posterior chain, they just naturally will align themselves better with gravity and more optimally because they can feel the difference before and after of what their relationship is with gravity and those forces. So it's not that I pulled him into alignment, it's that I turned on that connection between his brain and his body, and then he, from the inside out, aligns himself. So the adjustment is a co-created, collaborative effort between the chiropractor and the person on the table so that we can help you better adapt to your internal and external conditions. So, the adjustment comes from the outside in, but the correction comes from the inside out.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, like for those of you listening, this is why, what Alex just described there, getting adjusted also pairs very nicely with strength training. So like getting that better signaling and then providing an input, i.e. putting a weight on your back or just putting a weight in your hands and taking advantage of that clarity that you have now. So yeah, Alex and I are going to go through some myths and we'll just go through and talk about, whether or not they're true. What does the evidence actually say about it? And I think this will be a really good episode. But so the first myth is that it's very common for people to believe that chiropractors are not actually doctors. And I know that Alex actually went through a very lengthy program. So Alex, you want to tell people what you went through? What is the typical track for chiropractors to do what they do?
Yeah, so it's true that chiropractors are not medical doctors, and that's an important distinction to make. But we still earn a doctorate degree. We still have to go to accredited universities. And then there's also both national and state boards that we have to pass to be licensed in practice. So the Doctor of Chiropractic program, where I went to school at Life University, which is the biggest chiropractic school in the world currently, it's a 4-year program, 3.5 years, depending on how fast you make it through. Most people take about 4, but basically it's broken down into quarters. Most undergraduate programs are in semesters, with the average student taking about 15 credits per semester. That works out to about 30 credits a year. At chiropractic school, it was an average of 25 credits per quarter, so 100 credits per year. So in the first 3 years, that's about 300 credits of class. And then the last half year is purely clinical, similar to how medical doctors have to go through a residency. Ours is much shorter, only being half a year, but it's a fully clinical immersion experience. So all in all, it adds up to about 330 credits of doctorate of chiropractic training. And that includes anatomy and physiology, pathology, microbiology, biochemistry, orthopedic, neurological, and visceral diagnosis, ethics and jurisprudence, case management, and lots of radiology. And all of those are tested on national boards. There are 5 total parts of national boards. The first being the fundamental stuff like neuroanatomy, spinal anatomy, biology, physiology, pathology, stuff like that. And then parts 2 through 4 are more clinical. Part 5 of national boards is just for physical therapy. So many chiropractors also have physical therapy privileges, where during the chiropractic program, you can take elective credits, elective classes in physical therapy with both lecture and lab. So there's both classroom and hands-on training in various physical therapy protocols and modalities. And once you've taken a certain number of those physical therapy electives, you're eligible to take the physical therapy portion of national boards. So in addition to those 4 required for chiropractic licensure, there's also a 5th optional. When I was practicing in North Carolina, there's actually not an option to skip the physical therapy portion. To be licensed to practice chiropractic at all in the state of North Carolina, everyone's required to take that physical therapy portion of boards, which means you have to also have taken those electives. So we, in addition to our chiropractic coursework and clinic work, we also have to get a significant amount of education on physical therapy as well to practice in most states. And even if you're going to do something as simple as recommend heat or ice or, any kind of stretch or exercise that may be beneficial for a person, that technically falls under the umbrella of physical therapy. That's not strictly speaking under the scope of chiropractic. And most chiropractors do those things. So almost every chiropractor who practices has training and some amount of certification in physical therapy as well. So there's quite a lot of education there. And then also another licensure requirement is a 4-year undergraduate degree. So I did mine at the University of Maryland at College Park. I got a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology. So that was a 4-year program followed by 3.5 years of chiropractic school, 5 parts of national boards. And then you're not done yet. You also have to be licensed in your state. So the Maryland Board of Health gave me my license to practice chiropractic. I just looked up because it's up on the wall in front of me.
Proud moment.
Maryland Board of Health gave me my license to practice chiropractic. And without that approval from the Maryland Board, it would be illegal for me to be practicing at all. So any chiropractor that you can see who is, licensed professionally has been approved at the national level by an accredited institution, has an undergraduate degree, and has also been licensed by that state's Board of Health. So it's quite a rigorous process. It's very thorough. There's background checks, and not just anybody can become a chiropractor. So, while we're not medical doctors, and I understand where some of the not a real doctor mentality comes from, what we go through is a very real program to become, a competent clinician and, not just be competent in chiropractic, but also recognizing when things are outside of our scope and when we need to make a referral to another clinician or provider. So,
yeah. No, and I think that's great. I really don't understand. Like, I get it. Yeah, you can't really prescribe medicine, but like there are people that are English professors that are called doctor. So it's like you went through the program, you are technically a doctor, and that's something that you should be proud of, and it does deserve more recognition. But yeah, thank you for going through all that. The second one I have is, and this is a pretty common thought, chiropractic care is only for back pain. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So this is actually a great opportunity to kind of weave some history into this. And this will also tie into the chiropractors are not real doctors point. What actually earned chiropractors licensing rights from boards of health in various states and in, the United States, chiropractic was founded in the United States of America. It's an American profession. It has spread across the world, but it was, uniquely founded in the States. And in 1895. And in the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, that was a time where basically chiropractors were being jailed for practicing medicine without a license. Even though if you asked a chiropractor, they're not practicing medicine, but because they were calling themselves doctor and treating patients, the AMA, the American Medical Association, was labeling them as, okay, you're practicing medicine without a license. Chiropractors were being jailed and fined. And it wasn't until the Spanish flu when the AMA considered some evidence about patient outcomes from chiropractic care, not relating to neck pain, back pain, or headaches, which are the big 3 things that people think about when they think about chiropractic care and who goes for chiropractic care. What actually caught the eye of the AMA was the clinical outcomes for people with Spanish flu. There was one place in the entire US where people were dying at 1/40th the rate of the general public. And that was at the Palmer Chiropractic College clinic on campus. And people who were under care at the Palmer Clinic were much more resilient, much more able to survive the Spanish flu. And when the AMA saw this data, they said, fine, you guys obviously have something that we don't understand and we can't explain. and we can't argue with those numbers. They're verifiable. And so that's when they awarded licensing privileges to chiropractors, not because of how good we were at back pain, neck pain, or headaches, but because we were adjusting sick people and they were not as sick compared to the control group of the general populace. So very cool. And I actually have a lived experience that ties into that as well. When I was in my last quarter of chiropractic school, and I had spent lots of time learning about neck pain, back pain, and headaches and getting asked about that, I came down with hand, foot, mouth, which, if you've ever heard of that, is a Coxsackie virus infection that tends to happen with exposure to, people who work in like childcare settings. Happens to, run around kids. And I had a friend who was teaching bassoon lessons to children who got it that way. And after getting exposed to him on a double date with our partners, a few days later, I came down with it. And I'm in a physical therapy lab, and I start getting this feeling like something's wrong in my body. I'm about to get really sick. And so I excused myself from the class and I went back home. As soon as I got in the door, I just, ran to the bathroom and started puking. And that went on for 12 hours till there was nothing left in me. And then that happened. I passed out and just fell asleep for, until the next day. And in that next day, I think, okay, I'm done puking. I feel better. That's not typically a symptom of hand, foot, mouth, so I'm probably all right. I think it's just a stomach bug. I was in denial because I started getting,
Real quick, sorry to interrupt. If you're still here, I really appreciate you. If you've gotten any value from this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and hitting the notification bell so that you get notified every time I release a new video. I release a full podcast every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And also throughout the week, I'm releasing segment videos that could be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes long, just providing my commentary on segments that interested me that week. But hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and that's it for me. Back to the video.
So this like prickly heat on my hands and on my feet. And I thought, okay, well, it's July in Atlanta. This must be, or August in Atlanta. This must be heat rash. And it was not heat rash. It was also over both hands and both feet, and just hour by hour getting worse and more painful. And I'm like tiptoeing around, trying not to put weight on my feet because it hurts so bad just to stand or walk. And that night, even just trying to lay down on my bed, having my hands or feet touching the mattress at all was too painful. So I went out and I sprawled like a starfish on my couch. And eventually I watched the sunrise. So I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. It was just like there was a fire on each extremity. So I had an appointment with my chiropractor the next day, and I had to let him know, like, there's no way I'm going to be able to make this. I can't safely operate a car right now and get to you. And he says, well, hold on. I'll come see you tonight. Let me wrap things up in the practice and, pick up my kids and stuff, and then I'll come to you. And at about 10 o'clock at night, he makes it to my apartment. My roommate lets him in, and he adjusted me on my portable table in my living room, and he didn't charge me anything. And after he left, I immediately conked out and fell asleep for 10 hours, which compared to the previous night, 0 hours of sleep in, acute distress all night. So that adjustment made such a huge difference. And in the morning, the sores all over my hands and feet, they went from this like angry hot pink color to like a dark cherry, like a much darker, more concentrated looking color. And instead of being raised and bumpy and, some of them were oozing, they were now flat and smooth with my skin. So that, 12 hours, night sleep difference, there's a visual apparent difference in the lesions all over my hands and feet. And Dr. Deegan did nothing to address a viral infection or skin irritation. He just cleared out my neurospinal system, and I was better able to start adapting to the immunological stress that I was under. It wasn't about, a treatment for the virus or a treatment for my skin or hands or feet. It was just getting me more of that proprioceptive input, more of that mechanoreceptive input, so my brain and my body are better connected. And with that more information making it to my brain, I can better run the show from the inside out and adapt to the stresses that my system's facing. And that includes immunological stress. So during school, that was not something I was ever really thinking about. I was thinking about neck pain, back pain, and headaches. And to have that experience just before I, graduated and started serving the public was a really potent reminder of what chiropractic is really capable of. Just getting the brain and the body better connected. It has so many implications. And, I don't tell people that I treat diseases or, viral infections or things like that. But getting adjusted can only help your adaptive bandwidth or adaptive capacity increase. And that has positive benefits on really any area of life that you could think of.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of you may be thinking that that sounds crazy, but let me tell you something that kind of relates to that in a way that might bring it into a more common perspective. So like, let's say you sprain your ankle. Your body has a natural immune response to that. It's going to try and heal it. So what Alex is talking about here isn't some like new mechanism that no one talks about. It's very much the same sort of mechanism. He's providing an environment for that whole system to work a little bit better. And this is where, like, again, just I'm always going to draw it back to movement because that's what I do. But like even your lymphatic system can function poorly or it can function optimally. And even like your lymphatic system doesn't have a heart like your circulatory system. So it relies on other means of getting waste out, getting new nutrients in. And a lot of that is based off of movement. And so this isn't alien what he's talking about. In my case, like I'm talking about a sprained ankle, for example, and I don't recommend people do what I did, but I was out on a run on Saturday, and I went out into the grass trying to get away around a construction site, and I rolled my ankle really, really bad. And I mean, really bad. And so I was hobbling and I kept trying to keep going and it hurt. And I stopped for a moment and I told myself, if I stop, this is going to be much worse. And again, I'm not advocating that people try and do what I did because I am crazy, but I continued to run and I finished my run and it felt better as I was going on. The next day, it was still sore, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I can guarantee you, if I had just stopped, came home and just elevated my foot, like the whole rest, ice, compression, elevation, all that stuff, it would hurt so much more today. And so that whole model even has been sort of debunked by a lot of people. People don't really believe in rice anymore. They believe in movement. Stay moving. Keep those fluids moving in and out. Get that lymph out because it's just like pus and nasty crud you don't want in there. So you got to get the old stuff out, get the new stuff in. And Alex is just talking about providing that a better environment for that whole thing to occur. So in his case, it does make perfect sense, even though it might be difficult to kind of draw the correlations there. You have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. And, all those tissue level changes and, those changes that happen at the tissue and the cellular level with an injury, that's, the building blocks of what you're experiencing with the swelling and the inflammation and all that kind of stuff. But kind of what I like to point back to is that every system in the body is really under the master control system, which is the nerve system. And that's what my focus always is with the chiropractic adjustment. Sure, there are, tissue level changes that happen, even if I'm just, the same way that like a massage, you're encouraging, lymphatic drainage, increased circulation, venous return. All that stuff happens also with the chiropractic adjustment because you're putting pressure or decompression on the actual tissues of the body to make it happen. But we're really looking to influence the nerve system, the central and peripheral nerve system, so that the brain and body are better in touch with each other, so that the master control system of all that, the big show, can better coordinate all those responses by more effectively coordinating, vasoconstriction, vasodilation, things like that are really kind of the behind the scenes action of how you even get that inflammation response and how you clean it up in the first place from the inside out. So,
yeah, absolutely. That's great.
One thing a lot of talk about is innate intelligence. And that can sound like kind of a woo-woo concept, but if you think about like, I had to learn Krebs cycle in school in biochemistry class. My body didn't have to learn the Krebs cycle to carry it out millions of times per second. So There is that innate intelligence, encoded in all of our DNA and everything that, we carry out these functions naturally. And what can get in the way is any kind of interference. So, this disconnection between the brain and the body, the master control system that helps us run these shows and, run these processes as efficiently and optimally as possible, making sure there's no disconnections, there's no interference anywhere along that feedback loop between the central nerve system and every other cell in the body, helps you have the conditions, like Randall said, to be able to do that as effectively, efficiently, and with as little interference as possible. So master control system of the entire body is the nerve system. And that's really what we're focused on as chiropractors, making sure that's clear and connected to every other system in the body.
Yeah. No, that's great. I like that. I don't see how people could even debate that there is an innate intelligence with the body. I mean, we are adaptation machines, man. It doesn't matter what you throw at us. Like we just keep going. And it's like, even just like, I think the biggest thing for me is just like endurance exercise, like how amazingly we adapt to be able to go for super long periods of time. Whereas like the first time you do it, you can't do it.
Yeah, you're
But then you just keep going and keep going. And then all of a sudden you're running for 3 hours, 4 hours. It's just like, holy crap, what's going on here? You know, it's amazing.
Yeah, and even just seeing those cross sections. I remember in kinesiology at UMD seeing Olympic rowers and cross sections of like their heart wall thickness during the competitive season, and then even just 4 weeks into the off season, and seeing how much the thickness of their heart walls changes based on the demands of their daily lives. So
Yeah.
and
it happens quick.
yeah, the other thing with the innate intelligence, one way I explain that to new patients when I see them is if I get a cut on my finger, it's not the Neosporin or the Band-Aid that I put on the cut that causes it to heal. My body recognizes that there's a cut on my finger. It sends new cells, fills up that cut, and it's also sending cleanup crew to remove damaged cells and debris and clean up any thing that increases the chance for infection. And Neosporin and Band-Aid can support that process, sure, but you can't put Neosporin and a Band-Aid on a corpse and expect a cut to heal. There's something about a living system that's able to, run these processes and adapt in real time to the stresses and challenges that the body takes on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good thing to picture. Like the Neosporin and the Band-Aid is just providing a sterile environment so it doesn't get infected, but your body is doing the healing, like that scab that your body produced, that's you, No, that's great. So myth number 3, chiropractic adjustments are dangerous. How about this?
Yeah. So one thing that I like to tell people is that chiropractors, we are primary care providers. We can refer people out, and you don't need a referral to come see us. At least in the United States, we have primary care provider status. And with that, out of all the other, primary care providers, medical doctors, orthopedists, neurologists, anyone else that you can list, we pay the lowest in malpractice insurance premiums. And that statistically means what we do is safer and costs the insurance companies less than any other kind of healthcare provider at the primary provider level. So what we do is inherently so much safer than drugs or surgery. Drugs can have unintended side effects or allergic reactions or cross reactions with other medications that can be serious and life-ending. Surgeries, anything involving anesthesia, there's always a risk with, and botched surgeries we see happen all the time. I mean, think of, any number of celebrities. Roger Ebert, I think that was a big part of how he died was, a series of medical accidents. And anyway, so I think before the coronavirus pandemic, medical mistakes were, I believe, the 3rd or the 5th leading cause of death in the United States. And if chiropractic were anywhere on the top 10 or top 20 or top 50, we would not have a profession. So that's just one thing to think about. Our insurance, my malpractice insurance premium is less expensive than my the cost of insuring my Toyota Corolla. So that gives you an idea of how low risk what we do is as far as insurance companies are concerned. And they do very careful math. So the other thing is, yes, there is some risk to just about anything you do in life, but particularly I think the risks that there are with chiropractic care, one of the big ones that you hear about is a broken rib. And I teach seminars on chiropractic adjusting technique in both the spine with my group Chiro Ease, and also in the extremities with the Dr. Katie McCauley practicing in Colorado with extremity evolution. And we teach, best practices that are safer and more effective than, some of the old school stuff that you may see that's at this point kind of dated. A lot of the old school docs would tell us in school, oh yeah, if you're in practice long enough, someday you'll probably break someone's rib. It's going to happen. And I refuse to accept that. And the way that we teach thoracic and rib adjusting in Chiro Ease, there's basically a 0% chance that a rib could possibly be fractured for a number of technical reasons that, I don't need to get into on this podcast. But there are ways to, on the technical side, as the chiropractor, hone your technique, hone your craft, think smarter about the biomechanics for both you as the chiropractor and the person on the table so that neither party get injured. Chiropractors injuring themselves is extremely, extremely common. A whole lot of chiropractors, just like massage therapists or, any labor-intensive body workers do tend to have, high risk of injury to themselves. But so with these seminars, making sure that what we're doing is safer, not only for the person on the table, but also for the chiropractor. And so, there are ways that you can devise these adjustments and create conditions biomechanically where you're getting that release or, that input of proprioceptive information to the targeted joints that are subluxated or not getting that full accurate conveyance of information from the body to the brain, getting motion through those joints without, with the lowest possible risk of collateral damage to the nerve system, to the target tissues, or, any other structures. So one of my big pet peeves is when I see doctors on social media, doctors of chiropractic, doing cervical, I call it manipulation. And I don't consider this to be an adjustment where they twist the head with both hands. 99.999% of the time, it's fine. But every time you do that, there's going to be some amount of stress on, as far as, shearing the axons. I like to use my hand to model the neuron, cell body, axon, dendrites. And I did actually my senior thesis in kinesiology on axonal shearing as a mechanism of traumatic brain injury. And I didn't realize at the time how relevant that was going to be to chiropractic. But basically, any kind of rotational trauma to the head, neck, or spine, on the macro scale, you can see like a football collision where someone gets hit on the helmet and their head rotates and they shift over to the side. On the microscopic level, at the cell level, the cell body of the neuron is the biggest and widest part, and there's leverage from the cell body about the axon, which is the long, skinny part that conveys electrical information down its length. So any kind of rotational stress on the cell body is basically going to ring that axon, like ringing a neck. It's going to, neurons are made mostly of fat. If you imagine butter, for example, at human body temperature, 98.6, it's very, very delicate. So any kind of shearing on those neurons is going to decrease the ability of those cells to convey electrical information down their length. And in some cases, it'll even kill the cell. So that's why I'm super passionate about teaching technique courses, because I want to eradicate the two-handed rotary cervical adjustment. Again, 99.999% of the time, it's fine and there are no ill effects from it. But because there is that possibility of axonal shearing, there's a good, better, and best way to do things. And we're always chasing, what's the higher level of care that we can offer? How can we do this safer, more effective, and with less collateral damage to the other surrounding tissues? And in my practice, I'm very strict about technique and form, and I hold myself to the standard that I would hold students and doctors to at my own seminars, because that's what the public deserves. So, even with these suboptimal practices like, the rotary manipulation, doctors get incredible results. And for the most part, it's still really safe. And that's the widely used practice. And still we have that, lower than any other primary healthcare provider malpractice insurance rate. So it tells you that even though there's obvious room for improvement in the profession at large, what we're doing is still safer overall, on average than medicine, because there's no drugs and no surgeries that are being done. So like I said, lots of ways to always refine the adjustment. We should be seeking to constantly make it safer and more effective and do the most good with the least amount of input. My style is very gentle, and I pride myself on that because I want to do, communicate as much to the central nerve system as possible with the least amount of insult to the tissues. So chiropractic is safe, and I'm working hard to make it safer with every seminar I teach. I taught 5 a year in the last 2 years, and I'm just going to keep that going because I want to eradicate the rotational cervical. I want to never see a chiropractor break another rib, and couldn't be me. So
no, there's a lot there. So the first point, I think that's, you bring up a really good point about the insurance thing, because that's actually, people don't realize this, but hospitals being so dangerous is actually a massive confounding factor with medical studies, with medical research. So like colonoscopy, for example, you wouldn't expect the colonoscopy to be that risky, but just the fact that the person is in that facility carries a massive risk. Like you said, it used to be, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was number 3 at one point or somewhere around there in terms of your chance of dying. Yeah. Very dangerous, and that could be for any number of reasons. That could be mislabeling forms. It could be, anything. So no, that's a good point. And then also just to your point that you refine your skills and you practice proper technique. And I can actually vouch for this. Like I said, Alex used to be at the gym that I worked at, CoreWorks, and I would see him, even though he's not on a table or anything, he would be using resistance bands and stuff. And he would be practicing adjustments. And one thing I think about, have you ever seen the movie Den of Thieves? It's like a gangster versus cops movie.
I've never actually seen it, but I know about it.
Okay, yeah. So before the final shootout of that movie, there's like this scene where all the cops are getting ready. They're putting their vests on. They're making sure their guns are loaded. And one of the cops, he doesn't have a gun in his hand, but he's practicing letting the clip go, putting a new clip in, reloading his gun, and he just keeps doing it over and over again. And he's doing that to program his motor system, or nervous system. And I always think back to you whenever I see that. I actually just watched it the other night. Just amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. But that's exactly what you were doing. Even though you weren't actually adjusting someone, you were still just making sure that that was fresh, so that when you actually are, and people would say like, what is he doing? And I was like, he's doing what he should be. He's refining his craft. He's making sure that it's not a surprise when he goes in there and he actually puts his hands on someone, and I always like respected the shit out of that, man.
Yeah, it's a certain number of hours or reps to get to that unconscious competence. And now I'm at a point in my training where I actually don't do the resistance bands very much anymore, because I got to a point where I plateaued on that. And, the speed and the depth and the vectoring I felt really, really sure about. But
you just got to add a barbell.
Had a barbell. Yeah. So then I got more to the point now where I'm, really refining the individual differences. No two necks are alike, no two spines are alike. And even the same person on 2 different days may have different kind of reactivity. Their muscles may kind of fire up in different ways as I'm, getting my contact, doing my palpation, setting up for the adjustment, factoring in the amount of depth necessary, the amount of speed necessary to get the perfect adjustment for that person in that moment. But anyway, there's a really influential chiropractor who passed away earlier this year, Dr. Arnaud Bernier. And, a lot of things, he was just massively influential to the profession in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that he used to say was, in the mid-90s, he would ask, do you want to be the Michael Jordan of chiropractic? Or do you just want to, be another practicing doc? Well, what does Michael Jordan do? He trains his ass off. And, he didn't get where he was by accident, and neither will you. So he really encouraged a training culture in chiropractic that had kind of been let go from the early days. And there's, these black and white videos from, like the 1930s and stuff of chiropractors, in classrooms, and there's just tables lined up and everybody's at a table and they're practicing on drop pieces, doing, different vectors, different types of adjustments. And that was their classroom education, or a significant part of it. Now, obviously, across the board classrooms, there's a lot of standardized testing and sit and listen to the lecture, sage on the stage model. And, it's up to us in chiropractic to fill our own cups, so to speak, with that technique portion of things. And, during my time in school, I sought out every elective seminar I could possibly go to on the weekends, every opportunity I had for technique immersion, and then creating my own opportunities with other students and, local chiropractors where we would get together, practice palpation, practice analysis, practice setups. Because just like I would compare it when talking to, students who weren't as far as me in school yet, say, if you go and see a barber who just finished hair school, you don't want to be the first ever haircut they give a real person. You would hope that they had practiced with some other people first, right? So Same idea, by the time I started practicing, while I was in school, I was probably adjusting about 40 people a week in my last year because, for one, I was hungry for that, continuing education before I'd even started. But also there were that many people in the area who knew that I was a hardworking student who had a lot of time spent on training, hands-on and adjusting. So when they needed to get adjusted, they thought, I'll go see Dr. Alex, even though I wasn't a doctor yet. So
yeah.
The commitment to mastery is something that, I think whatever you do, whatever profession you're in, if you're not obsessed with it, you're not going to be the best at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Unfortunately, that is sort of something that plagues the fitness industry these days. There are people that, they have no sort of background. Maybe their background is they were an athlete in college, and so they have a 6-pack or something, but, they know actually very little about an anatomy or kinesiology or anything like that, and they're out there hurting people.
Those are the
I
people
do this, so
that like science reputation, and it's the same thing. I have to fight an uphill battle with PR for chiropractic because there's people out there who do, make us look like quacks, make us look like fake doctors, and do hurt people sometimes.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
The only thing that we can do, like what you're doing, Randall, is leading from the front, being the best possible trainer that you can be, and letting the results that your people have speak for themselves, and letting the communities speak to each other. And just by, being awesome yourself, you're improving the public perception of your entire profession. And that's what I'm about to do.
Absolutely, man. I love it. So myth 5 and 6 are sort of similar. So let's just combine these two. So there is no scientific evidence supporting chiropractic care. And the other one is chiropractors don't use evidence-based practices. So let's just merge those. And what would you say, are there studies that you could point to that people could go to that are kind of like a really good representation of evidence for chiropractors or anything like that?
Yeah. So really, if you just search and look, you'll find, anything about searching the effectiveness of chiropractic care. You'll find results on neck pain, back pain, and headaches primarily. And in treating those symptoms, chiropractors are found to be as effective, at least, as physical therapy or, pain management medications. And while that's great, it really just scratches the surface. Like I talked about, neck pain, back pain, and headaches, that's where most of the literature is. But there's also literature coming out now. I mean, just earlier, I think 2 months ago, Dr. Heidi Havoc published from the New Zealand College of Chiropractic a study about chiropractic and low back pain, but also sleep. And I think disposition and mood were on there as well. And they were doing, brain imaging studies and stuff like that while people were on a prescribed course of chiropractic care against a control group. So we're seeing outcomes not only with, pain relief, but also with improved sleep quality, also athletic performance. And there's all kinds of different areas. I don't have a lot of the research on hand about chiropractic and athletic performance, but it must be there because every NFL team, every NBA team, they all have chiropractors on staff, and they wouldn't be doing that if they couldn't prove that it didn't work. So
yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, you got to look at the best of the best and see what they're doing. If they have a chiropractor, there's a reason for it. But just to echo your point, and this is just to appease some of the evidence-based folks out there that may actually want to hear some of this stuff. So if you've been following me for any number of years or whatever, I'm evidence-based and I do actually look into things. So, chiropractic adjustments is no different. Like Alex said, the outcomes are very similar to physical therapy. And I know that's not what he's focused on, but just to read out a few of these, and this, I'm telling you, the overwhelming outcome, like there's overwhelming amount of evidence in favor of chiropractors. It's like, as he said, just Google it and you won't have a hard time finding it. But just this, so we have 1 year follow-up comparison of the cost and effectiveness of chiropractic and physiotherapy, that's physical therapy in the States, as primary management for back pain. This has 154 citations. There was no significant differences found in health improvement, cost, or recurrence rate between chiropractic and physiotherapy treatments. So they're the same. I'm not going to read out every title. Maybe I could put it in the show notes so you could look at it yourself. But this next one has 157 citations. Both chiropractic and physiotherapy were effective in reducing symptoms for patients with low back or neck pain. There were no significant differences in effectiveness between the two. This one, chiropractic treatment was more effective than hospital outpatient management, especially for patients with chronic or severe back pain. Chiropractic therapy led to greater improvements in pain and physical function compared to sham treatment. And a sham treatment would be like a placebo treatment, essentially. This one, here's a meta-analysis of 30 randomized control trials. It's 43 randomized control trials. 30 of them found chiropractic manipulation to be more effective than comparison treatment for low back pain. So I'm not cherry picking any of these, just so y'all know. Like, this is literally, I'm just going in order, and every single one, and I have way more, like it's actually a pretty extensive list. Every single one is in favor of chiropractic adjustments. So for people that say that there isn't really evidence out there, I think you'd have to be like, I don't know, maybe just woefully ignorant, or just, I don't know what's up with your search browser, So
Mr. Magoo searching.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, man. So yeah, medical doctors
Sorry, what were you saying?
No, that's okay. Go ahead. You cut out for a second. I couldn't hear you, but go for it.
The other thing too is that, case studies I know are one of the lower levels of evidence, but when you accumulate enough of them, they mean something. And, there's lots of things that, I've experienced with people in practice that I can't say, oh, because this happened for that person, chiropractic does this. But I'm trying to keep records of this stuff so that throughout my career, I can eventually build something up into, a collection of case studies. And, I've already been seeing improvements with a young woman I've been working with who is paralyzed from L1 down as a result of a kind of a freak viral infection complication that she had back in 2016. She was the first case of this viral waterborne virus in Maryland. And she has been paralyzed from L1 down since 2016. And she's been doing at the Kennedy Krieger Institute physical therapy about once a week. And since I started care with her, they've actually had to refit her for something called an RGO, or a reciprocating gait orthosis. And it's because her hip flexors are starting to fire now where they weren't before. So she's fighting this machine that's helping her kind of try and relearn how to walk, because her muscles are turning on more than they had previously accounted for when they first fit her for it. So I can't say that chiropractic can help paralyzed people get out of their wheelchairs and, start walking again. But I'm hoping that with enough time, with enough cases like this, there can be some even low-level evidence or something to look into that, there are things way beyond neck pain, back pain, and headaches, that chiropractic does help the nerve system function at a fundamentally better level. Because that's, essentially what her injury is a neurospinal dysfunction in a very literal sense, and not just, disafferentation like we talked about in the definition intros. So really excited to see what can possibly happen with this young lady, getting her legs back. The fact that her hip flexors are firing again in a way that they weren't before we started care, and she had been paralyzed for going on 8 years now, that's pretty incredible stuff. So again, that's not a randomized clinical control double-blind study, but enough cases over time, I think really can add up to something. And that's something that I want to really be intentional about moving forward in my career, is collecting these cases, keeping really good records of everything, and being able to present that at some point later.
Yeah. No, I mean, and back to your point about, sports teams. Yeah, case studies, like anecdotal data isn't like the gold standard, but if you collect enough of them, something to consider for the people out there. How many people do you know that have a chiropractor? Because it's a lot, I would venture to guess probably 80% of my clients have a chiropractor. And that's extremely common. The guy that I was just talking to before this, he has a chiropractor. And so how did it get to the point that everyone has chiropractors? Like, obviously there's some good happening there that people are starting to recognize, where, referrals, it's referrals, you get referred. Hey, I know this guy, he worked magic for me. Like, yes, that's an anecdote, but it's spreading like wildfire. And I think it is doing actually a lot of good.
And just one thing I want to point out, there is a bias in your profession. You're going to be seeing the kind of people who go for chiropractic care, because of the general public in the US, it's less than 10% utilization of chiropractic.
That's a good point.
So a massively untapped general public. And that for me is really exciting, because the more people that I can start getting to see what we do, why we do it, and how we do it, outside of some of the old paradigms that may have, been easy to brush off or even scared them away in the past, kind of bringing them into this new conceptualization and explanation of chiropractic that makes more sense. And, in some ways, some of the science is caught up with some of the things that, D.D. Palmer, the very criticized founder of chiropractic, put in his books back in the early 1900s. D.D. Palmer has been criticized for a lot of things. Rightfully, there is some weird stuff he did, but at the same time, he was one of the first people to get the idea that the nerve system communicates with the language of tone. So there's not like a circuit type relationship where the brain has a nerve ending to every single cell in the body and they're all individually wired, but rather, a nerve or a group of nerves fires at a certain tone or frequency that, the cells receive that information through those, basically like pulses, the firing frequency, like doot, 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 doot versus doot, 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 is two different messages to each cell in the body. And that's how like stretch receptors work in, blood vessels and in muscles. And we understand that now, but in 1900, nobody knew what the heck he was talking about, because there were no examples and no established physiological ways to prove that that's what he was, talking about. But that messaging makes a whole lot more sense nowadays, because we know what we know now. And the language of the nerve system is tone. And some of these ideas from this kooky old guy who started it all are making a lot more sense now and are a lot easier to communicate than they were back then.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last one I have, and if you have any more, we can go over them. The last one I have is medical doctors don't condone chiropractors. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
So there are definitely some medical doctors who don't like chiropractors, don't like what we do, but also the the practice I was in before this, just about 100% of my patients were medical referrals. Everybody I was seeing was medically managed. So they saw both, me, the chiropractor, and a medical doctor, and or an orthopedist, an orthopedic surgeon, because it was an acute injury clinic. And every single patient that I saw there was also being medically managed, which means anyone who showed up on my schedule was put there by scheduling, who had, a script that this person should see the chiropractor for, 3 times a week for 4 weeks or whatever. So there are medical doctors who routinely collaborate with chiropractors, and that's a big part of their care plans for people under their care. There's also some chiropractors who have hospital privileges. In the state of Maryland, Dr. Brian Morrison, who practices in Ellicott City, he's been in practice now, I think, 30 plus years, but he was the first chiropractor in the state of Maryland to be awarded hospital privileges, where he's allowed to come into the hospital and adjust patients there, the hospital's patients, as an affiliate chiropractor. So there are, medical doctors who don't like us, medical doctors who will tolerate us and, live alongside us. And then some who, even themselves get under care. I've adjusted medical doctors and surgeons, and there's plenty of them who will refer to us as well. I've definitely worked with surgeons who have patients come to me because they want to try and, do conservative care, least invasive care first before doing a surgery or like a joint replacement or, anything more permanent and more risky. So there are a lot of different doctors and a lot of different medical specialties who regularly do refer to chiropractors. I've had neurologists refer to me to help people with migraines and get off, migraine medications and stuff like that. So medicine's not a monolith, just like chiropractic's not a monolith. And
just like fitness isn't a monolith.
Like fitness isn't a monolith. And there's going to be people really on any side of the aisle. And, what I'm trying to do now is continue pushing that needle of public perception, showing that chiropractic's not something to be scared of. And that's something we can embrace and really leverage to get improved public health across the board. And just like, if more people were doing what Randall's doing, we'd have a healthier populace. So that's what I'm doing with these seminars. I want there to be more chiropractors serving a higher level of care so that we can have a healthier, happier general public. And that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. Awesome, man. I love it. Do you have any other myths that you want, or just closing thoughts, anything else that you would like people to know about your profession?
Yeah, there's one on here. Chiropractors only work with the spine. And we've talked about extremities briefly. Any synovial joint in the body, that's what can be adjusted. And, even some non-synovial joints like the sutural joints of the skull, really.
Do you want to go in a little bit more depth on the sutural joints of the skull? Because people might not realize that there are actual junctions.
So if you've ever looked at like, even like a cartoon skull, you can see like the ridges that are like the sutures, because the skull is made up of a number of fused bones. And basically, one thing that a lot of chiropractors, or even some massage therapists, you may have heard of craniosacral therapy. That's related to this as well. So like we were talking about, the lymph system, for example, doesn't have a pumping organ like the heart to actively eject the lymph throughout the body and circulate it. So it relies on tissue, fluid pressures and stuff like that to open up those valves in the lymph vessels and get that stuff moving. Cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid that the brain and the spinal cord are bathed in. Nerve tissue is so sensitive to, chemical gradients and stuff that blood is actually toxic to nerve cells, and it'll damage the nerve cells on contact. That's why if you've ever seen in like medical shows where they do the spinal tap, and they like take a sample of the cerebrospinal fluid, if there's blood in the CSF, that's a medical emergency, because that blood is toxic to those cells that the CSF is bathing. And yeah, so there are cells in the lining of the skull that filter out blood, and they remove the proteins, they remove the blood cells, and you're left with, from blood, this clear fluid without blood cells in it, that has like some hydrogen ions and glucose and ketone bodies, depending on your diet. And basically that provides nutrition to the nerve cells. It also, just by circulating around the brain and the spinal cord, it's also removing any kind of cellular debris. People talk about plaques and tangles, for example, with Alzheimer's. And those are basically metabolic waste products from nerve cell metabolism. So as the cell is just doing its daily functions of life, it's taking in nutrients and excreting waste. And these like plaques and tangles are waste products of cell metabolism. And if they're not getting cleaned up by a flowing, healthy cerebrospinal fluid circulation, they accumulate on the brain and spinal cord. And that's not good for the function of these cells. So, just like if you can't remove waste from your own body, you're going to be in trouble, right? So if these
Right.
cells are bathing in their own waste, that's not beneficial to their function and structure. So cerebrospinal fluid has also been called the dishwasher of the brain, because if you know how a dishwasher works, there's water in there and it gets all circulated around, and that, helps clean the dishes off of any stuff that's caked on there or whatever. Whereas the heart is actively pumping blood through the whole body. There's no such pumping organ for the CSF. So what happens is at the very bottom of the spine, the sacrum, as it moves forward and backward while we're, really doing any kind of movement, the sacrum's generally also moving. Breathing as well, the sacrum nutates and counter-nutates while we breathe. The sutural joints of the skull also move about 1 millimeter apiece. There's a slight expansion and contraction that occurs there, and that creates a pressure difference that gets that CSF moving up and down the length of the neurospinal system. And that kind of creates that dishwasher of the brain movement. And when people have any kind of dysfunction with either the upper cervical region, so we were just talking about the skull, the upper cervical region where the skull sits on top of the neck, that anatomically, there's tissues there like the jugular vein, carotid arteries, vagus nerve, all that kind of stuff has a significant relationship with the amount of pressure on the skull and the brain and the CSF. So any kind of upper cervical dysfunction or dysfunction with the cranial sutural movement, that's going to affect the ability of that CSF to flow and to drain out and return to the circulation of the heart once that CSF is done doing its job and gets, put back in general circulation. So, just some gentle work along the cranial sutures can help encourage that flow to happen more optimally in the way that it ought to, increasing the ability of the cells to get nutrition from the CSF and remove waste, which is, two of the most vital functions of any living cell. So anyway, that's outside of just cracking the spine. And also one thing we didn't talk about is what is the crack?
Yes.
So
we can go into that.
When people think about chiropractors, they think about getting cracked, right? And that's actually not necessarily a part of getting adjusted. It tends to happen pretty commonly if you're getting adjusted by hand. But what the pop actually is, so if my finger is an example here, there's one bone here, my proximal phalanx, my middle phalanx, and there's that knuckle in between. That's the joint. And that joint has a capsule where the end of one bone meets the beginning of the other. So in that capsule, there's a fluid, synovial fluid, which is the lubricant of our joints. And that's what allows me to move my hand without squeaking like a gate in a almost entirely friction-free environment. So I can move my hand and that fluid lubricates it and allows it to do that smoothly and freely. So Boyle's law from physics, there's an inverse relationship between pressure and volume on a fluid in a closed system. So, if this is the capsule of the joint there, when I open up that joint capsule by pulling my finger, increasing the volume decreases the pressure on that fluid. If I depressurize that synovial fluid, it turns into gas instantaneously. And that's all the pop is a phase state change from synovial liquid to synovial gas. So people talk about, it's gas bubbles in the joint. Well, where are these gas bubbles coming from? They're just forming and foaming up and sitting in your joints all day long. It's not really how it works. It's that there's fluid that can then decompress and turn into gas rapidly. And It takes about 12 minutes for that gas to then recondense back into fluid. And that's when you can pop your knuckle again. So the only clinical significance to the actual pop itself is an analgesic effect that lasts for 12 minutes, the length of time it takes for that gas to recondense. Chiropractic has much more far-reaching effects than just an analgesic effect that lasts for 12 minutes. So the pop is really not what we're going for. It's really not the important part. Yes, there's so many compilations online, loudest pops compilation, and, that's the sound of relief. But in reality, some of the best adjustments I've personally ever received, no pop. Some of the worst adjustments I've ever received, loud pop. And all it really does is indicate that there was, a decompression, decrease on the pressure of the synovial fluid, causing it to pop and turn into gas. What I just did to my fingers right now has virtually no clinical significance. Getting adjusted, however, does. And what's the difference there? What was the intention behind the adjustment in the first place? Increasing that afferent input from the body to the brain so the central nerve system can more completely and more accurately perceive the body's relationship with space and gravity and more accurately adapt and more efficiently and effectively adapt to its external and internal conditions. So
yeah,
that's what the pop is.
Yeah. And that's great. And I hope that anyone that's watching or listening, like, I think what he just said again there, we've kind of gone through that a few times now. I hope that's the takeaway, because like, and I'll even ask chiropractors, I'm pretty sure I asked him when he first adjusted me, like, do you chase the pop? Because to me, if someone chases a pop, it's like a red flag, and I can even vouch for Alex that he was very gentle with me. And he actually referred one of his patients to me, and she said the same thing. Alex was always incredibly gentle with her. And that's why she liked him so much. So I think the big thing to take here is that, like, you're going to get a chiropractic adjustment. Your bones aren't literally dislocated. They're not popping your bones back into where they're supposed to be. You would be in excruciating pain if you were actually dislocated. He's just adjusting the tissues to increase proprioceptive awareness through the nerves to just make that communication system better than it was, so that you can be a better functioning and better healing human being.
Yeah.
That's the gist of it.
On that, yeah, I don't believe that people are out of place. If you had a joint that's actually dislocated, you need to go to emergency care, especially if you had a dislocation in your spine. I mean, you probably wouldn't be walking into the office. Almost guarantee you wouldn't. So,
you wouldn't be walking.
No.
Be on the floor and writhing pain.
It's not that your joints are dislocating and I'm popping them back into place, and when you have that deep release, like even when you see somebody get an adjustment, there's a big crack and there's a lot of movement in the joint, you feel that deep release. The most the joint is really actually moving is, very, very max 2 millimeters. It's a very small amount of physical, change in space. And they've measured that where they put, positioning pins that are connected to like a sensor in the computer at, different points in the spine. And they measure before and after an adjustment. And whether it's done by hand with a pop, whether it's done with an instrument, whether it's done using a drop table, it moves on average about 1.2 millimeters with or without the pop. And the movement itself is very subtle, but it's getting motion through the joint, not moving a bone from point A to point B. So right. I don't try and entertain it when people say, oh yeah, my C2 is out of place. Will you pop it back in? It's like, I kind of always roll my eyes when people talk to me that way, because I know their previous chiropractor probably talked to them that way. And there's some re-education we got to do and get them to the 21st century here. But basically motion through the joint, not, move the bone, lift it up off the nerve, and now your sciatica is gone. It's getting that improved proprioception, improved mechanoreception. Now you're, you yourself from the inside out are taking pressure off that sciatic nerve. And, it's empowering you to better organize and heal yourself from within. And that's what I love about chiropractic, is that it empowers the person on the table, as opposed to, the medical model, which puts the power in the hand of the practitioner, where it's up to them to, perform the surgery or prescribe the correct medication. And, the person who's there for help is kind of a passenger in all this. The chiropractic adjustment is empowering them to do the healing from the inside out by having a better connected neurospinal system with every other cell in their body.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Alex, thank you so much for being on my podcast and doing this. I think this is a very useful style that we went through, and hopefully people got a lot out of it. I know you are now a business owner, and your company is called Love Your Life Chiropractic. Do you want to just say a little bit about that, where you're located and where people can find you online?
Yeah, so I'm practicing in Baltimore, Maryland, right next to beautiful Patterson Park, crown jewel of Baltimore. And you can find me on Instagram at AlexRuthDC. And I am this week launching LoveYourLifeChiropractic.com. So very exciting stuff. Can't wait to serve the Baltimore community, high-level chiropractic care. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And Randall, it's been such a pleasure. I always love talking with you. We've had so many conversations in the past on health, healing, wellness, and well-being. And I feel like we always find new and different things to talk about. Or even when we're saying the same things, we find different ways to say it. And it always fills my cup and lights my fire, gets me excited. I'm super excited for my adjustments coming up later today. I know they're going to get a little bit of extra charge because, every time we have a conversation, every time I talk about health and wellness with you, it always just really lights my fire. So thank you for having me. Pleasure to be a part of this, and look forward to talking to you soon, man.
Awesome, man. Well, you have a great day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, everyone. If you're still here at the end of the video, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for sticking around. I just wanted to tell you about one quick thing that I'm offering to help people jumpstart their year going into 2025. So I had a friend approached me and asked me if I had any sort of like one-off starter programs for people to just pay one time and just kind of kickstart them. And so I came up with something for him, and I thought to myself, why don't I offer this to everyone? And so I came up with this package, and what it comes with is one 90-minute session. It comes with a movement assessment and warm-up guidance to basically see what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what sort of exercises should you be including in your warm-up for injury prevention. And then it also comes with an exercise program audit if you are experienced. So that's you giving me your program. I take a look at it based off of your goals. I kind of dissect it and make sure that it's heading in the right direction, make sure that it's as efficient as possible. If you're a complete newbie, then you get your own program based off of what you have access to, weights in your room, your home gym, or the actual gym, whatever it is. I'm more than experienced with all different types of environments. And then also it comes with a diet audit. So we go through your nutrition program if you are following a diet, and you can get a meal plan. We could talk about that, but typically what I like to do is give actionable nutrition tips that are gonna, something that's a little bit easier to follow. So for example, we might talk about hand portions for their meals. So, you know, a piece of protein the size of your fist, 1 to 2 cups palms of carbohydrate, and then an open hand for vegetables. So that's the program. It also comes with 2 check-ins throughout the month. Those are about 15 to 20 minutes. And of course, it's not that rigid, but the whole package comes out to $170. And I've done the math on this. This is a lot of value. And this is probably one of the best ways to kickstart. And I would really recommend you jump on this fast, because what you want to do is start before January 1st, get some momentum, and then get another surge of momentum going into the new year. So go ahead and email me if you're interested at randall@alwaysadaptive.com, or you can visit my website, and there's a button all over the place where you can schedule a free session, and I can get to meet you, and we can go over options and talk about what's next. So thanks again for sticking around for this video. I really appreciate it, and I will see you at the next one.